The walls of Carcassonne never fell. No decisive breach opened the inner city. No final storming broke the main defenses. The defenders were still holding when the end came. Yet, in August 1209, one of the most fortified cities in southern France surrendered to a crusade it had every reason to resist. Thousands of refugees had flooded in from the surrounding countryside after the massacre at Béziers, and inside those walls, the wells were already running dry under the August sun. The walls did not fail. The water did. Carcassonne sits on a rocky hill above the Aude River. In 1209, it was the seat of the Trencavel Viscounty, a territory of towns, vineyards, and trade routes stretching from the coast into the foothills of the Pyrenees. Raymond-Roger Trencavel had inherited this land 3 years earlier. He was 24 years old. Languedoc had its own spoken language, its own legal customs, and a tradition of religious variety. A movement that the church called Catharism had taken root here over decades. Many committed Cathar believers rejected the Catholic hierarchy and its sacraments. The church labeled them heretics. Their neighbors in many towns lived alongside them without particular conflict. Rome had spent 40 years trying to suppress this movement through argument and preaching. It had not worked. On January 14th, 1208, a papal legate named Pierre de Castelnau was killed on the banks of the Rhone. The murder was blamed on someone connected to Raymond VI, Count of Toulouse, the most powerful lord in Languedoc. Pope Innocent III declared a crusade, not against a foreign enemy, against the people of southern France. Northern nobles responded. Faith was part of it. So was land. A crusade against heresy in the south, backed by papal authority, was also an opportunity to claim southern territory under a religious mandate. Raymond VI moved quickly. He submitted to the church, accepted public penance, and joined the crusade himself, calculating that this was the only way to protect his own position. That decision shifted the full weight of the crusade's attention onto his neighbor, Trencavel. Trencavel controlled his own lands independently of Raymond VI. He had not submitted. He sheltered Cathars, Catholics, and Jews alike inside his cities. He refused to hand anyone over. In July 1209, the Crusade army moved toward his territory. The army's first major stop was not Carcassonne. It was Béziers, a town in Trencavel's Viscounty on the coast. Béziers fell on July 22, 1209, within hours of the assault beginning. The town was sacked, and a large part of the population was killed. A document written shortly after the event, attributed to Arnaud Amalric himself, the Cistercian abbot leading the crusade as papal legate, contains the phrase that has followed this event for 8 centuries. When asked how crusaders could tell the Cathar inhabitants from the Catholics, he is recorded as having said that God would know his own. Historians debate whether those exact words were spoken. The letter may reflect retrospective justification rather than a field command. What is not debated is the outcome at Béziers. Medieval sources gave death tolls that later researchers consider significantly inflated. Figures of 10,000 or 20,000 appear in chronicles. The actual number is likely lower, though still catastrophic by any measure of the period. What mattered for the towns between Béziers and Carcassonne was not the exact count. It was the direction of what had occurred. News reached the surrounding region within days. People left their towns and moved toward the only significant fortress still standing against the crusade, Carcassonne. They brought animals, food, children, whatever they could carry. They came because the walls were there and because Trencavel had said he would protect them. Trencavel accepted them. This decision, sheltering everyone who came, was made from duty and from the logic of a lord who understood what he was defending. It was also a decision that carried a cost he may not have fully measured. A city designed to hold a few thousand people was now sheltering somewhere between 10 and 15,000. The estimates vary across sources and should be treated carefully, but the direction is clear. The population had multiplied far beyond normal capacity, and it was August. The Crusade army appeared outside Carcassonne in the first days of August. Its exact size is recorded differently across medieval chronicles, but it was large enough to surround the city and establish camps on multiple sides. The walls held. Carcassonne had a double ring of defenses, a lower outer wall with towers, and a higher inner wall protecting the city proper. The Crusaders probed both. They took the settlements that lay outside the walls. They did not break the inner ring, but they controlled the Aude River. In August in southern France, water is not an abstract problem. It defines what a garrison can sustain, how long animals can survive, and how many people can hold a given space. The city had wells, but with a population several times the normal number drawing from those wells in summer heat, the wells were not enough. Within days of the siege beginning, the situation inside the city was deteriorating rapidly. Chronicles from the period describe animals dying of thirst, the population struggling under the heat, the water supply dropping faster than it could be recovered. The Crusaders noticed this. They had no reason to assault the walls at cost to themselves. They could wait. The city would come to them. Into this situation came an unexpected attempt at resolution. King Peter II of Aragon rode to the Crusader camp. Peter was Trencavel's feudal overlord and a respected Christian king, which meant his mediation carried real weight with the Crusade's leadership, who could not simply dismiss him the way they had dismissed the town's lesser defenders. Peter offered terms on Trencavel's behalf. The city would surrender its Cathar inhabitants for the Crusade to deal with. The remaining population, Catholics, Jews, ordinary townspeople, would be permitted to leave with their property. Arnaud Amalric refused. The terms the Crusade offered in return were these. Trencavel could leave the city with 11 men. Everyone else stayed, and their fate would be the Crusades to determine. Trencavel refused. Peter of Aragon left the camp. Here is the correction the story requires. For centuries, the Siege of Carcassonne has been framed as a contest of arms, Crusader strength against Occitan resistance, northern France against the south, orthodoxy against heresy. These dimensions were real, but by the second week of August 1209, the siege had become something more basic, a calculation. The walls were not failing. Trencavel's position was failing. Every day that passed consumed more of what remained inside. Every day, the wells dropped further. The animals were weakening. The Crusaders outside had the river, the surrounding countryside, and supply lines back north. The fatal flaw was not in the stone. It was in the decision made 3 weeks earlier, from a position of duty, to shelter everyone who came. The walls could hold an army out. They could not multiply the water underneath. No relief army was approaching. Peter of Aragon had failed at negotiation and left. Raymond VI was marching with the Crusade. The nobles of Languedoc, one by one, were submitting rather than fighting. By around August 14th, Trencavel's options had collapsed to 3. He could fight. The walls were still standing. The garrison was still armed. But fighting to the end meant waiting while the population inside died of thirst and heat in August, and there was no scenario in which a relief force arrived in time. He could surrender completely, hand the city over, and accept whatever terms the Crusade imposed on the population. After Béziers, those terms were not reassuring. Or he could negotiate. Accept an invitation to meet with the Crusade's leadership directly, under a guarantee of safe passage. Trencavel chose to negotiate. What happened when he entered the Crusader camp is contested in the sources. Some accounts suggest he went voluntarily and was detained when talks broke down. Others indicate the safe conduct was not honored from the moment he arrived. A third tradition holds that the invitation itself was the trap, that the Crusade's leadership never intended to let him return. The sources do not agree on the mechanism. They agree on the outcome. Raymond-Roger Trencavel entered the Crusader camp under a safe conduct promise and did not come back. With their Viscount captured, the people of Carcassonne had lost the center of their resistance. A city holds against an army when its leadership can organize, command, and negotiate from strength. remove the leader, and the question becomes not whether to surrender, but when. On August 15, 1209, Carcassonne surrendered. The population was ordered to leave. What they were permitted to take varies across the sources. The phrase most repeated in chronicles of the period is that they left with nothing but their sins, the clothes on their backs, and nothing else. Homes, tools, animals, grain, money, everything stayed behind. The Crusade army walked into an intact city. The Crusaders now held Carcassonne's walls, its storehouses, its towers, and its wells. They also had a problem. No one wanted to administer it. Accepting the Trencavel title and its lands meant accepting ongoing military responsibility for a crusade that had no end in sight, in territory that would not simply accept northern rule. The Crusade's leadership offered the city and the Viscounty to several northern French nobles in sequence. Each one declined. A mid-ranking French lord named Simon de Montfort eventually accepted. Trencavel remained a prisoner inside the city he had commanded. On November 10, 1209, he died in captivity at Carcassonne. The official explanation was dysentery. He was 24 years old. His contemporaries and later sympathizers suspected the circumstances were not natural. The exact details were never clarified. His son would attempt to reclaim the Trencavel lands in 1240. He failed. Carcassonne became a French royal stronghold and was reinforced further under Louis IX. The double walls that survive today are largely the product of those later French royal fortifications. The Albigensian Crusade continued for another 20 years. The Cathar movement was not destroyed at Carcassonne. It survived in villages and mountain communities for another generation. The final organized resistance ended in 1244 at a fortress called Montségur, high in the Pyrenees. But Carcassonne established the pattern. The lesson was clear. A well-defended city did not need to be breached if its supplies could be broken first. Control the water, wait for August, separate the commander from his men. The walls of Carcassonne were never broken. What broke was the one thing walls cannot protect: the water supply, the food reserves, the arithmetic of too many people in too little space in too much heat, and the trust placed in a guarantee of safe passage that may have been worthless from the moment it was offered. Trencavel was 24. His city was dying of thirst. No help was coming. Some historians read his decision to negotiate as the act of a lord trying to spare his people a worse end. Others read it as the moment his remaining leverage evaporated. Was the safe conduct a deliberate trap, or did negotiations simply fail? Drop your argument below. But here's the part most people skip. The Cathars Trencavel was sheltering weren't a homegrown French movement. Their theology, the rejection of the church, the hidden hierarchy, the dualist belief that the visible world itself was corrupt, traced back 2 centuries earlier and a continent away. To a Bulgarian priest, the Byzantine Empire tried and failed to burn out of existence. If you want to understand how a heresy born in the Balkans ended up costing a French viscount his city and his life, that's the video to watch next: the Bogomils, the forgotten heretics who terrified Europe first.